Morning, Joe. How you doing, sir?
Doing pretty well. No
All right.
complaints.
Well, thanks for joining me. So this video is part of a set of content coming out for the summit, and I was hoping to just do a little deep dive into what Rosen Bridge is. I would say right now that's like one of the most popular dApps on Ergo, and in my eyes, like one of the things that also expresses like the values of the community and
Mhm.
kind of executes really well on a philosophy that's like not always the easiest road, And so I just
No.
wanted to talk to you about that and get your opinion. Maybe first tell me like what is Rosen, what makes it different and special as opposed to other bridges.
No, all right. So Rosen itself is kind of an interchain protocol, is a good way to look at it. It's a transfer protocol between different endpoints. Okay. And part of what that gives the Ergo community is an element of interoperability, which is always nice, but it's hardened access. Access that basically we control, right, as a community. And that's powerful in this space because there are certain, I don't know, terms and conditions that we kind of have to comply to or potentially risk delisting, right? So you can use the example of privacy. There's only so far you can take that before you run into a problem where it's like the liability of your partners becomes an issue. And, they have too much control over your ability to access markets, right? Aside from the cost of access itself, it's also a permissioned environment. So the general idea is saying, okay, well, you have these different markets where liquidity is concentrated, and you also have these consumer facing, wallets, as an example, that we have the ability to back end without permission, right? And so
Mhm.
that puts us in a much stronger position long term where we're no longer subject to the grace of, external partners, right? And that's
Mhm.
something that I don't know, Ergo kind of suffered with because it was a fair launch system. So, our market access for a long time was largely dependent on, who we could pay and what their terms and conditions were, right? And so I think having freer access that we control as a community is powerful. It's something that's new, and I'd like to continue building it out to where we're available on a lot of consumer-facing entry points. Coinbase Wallet, Phantom Wallet, things that people are familiar with without needing the, I don't know, grace and permission of like a
Yeah.
gatekeeper in between those endpoints.
Yeah. Okay. So you just told me the why of Rosen. Sick. Like,
Hmm.
so just to restate, you built Rosen because access to crypto was permissioned and
Hmm.
dependent on all sorts of factors that were not in your control. And
Yep.
most of those factors were not aligned with your values.
Yeah.
Okay.
Essentially.
All right. Sick. So that's kind of what I was getting at when I was saying like, yeah, Rosen is like a good representative of the ecosystem and just like
Hmm.
enacts our values very well. But like a lot of times doing things from a principled position makes them more difficult, right? So
Hmm.
it's you're having to do all this stuff. So how does that get accomplished? Like why is Rosen how is Rosen actually different like on a implementation level? Like one of my favorite things to do is look from time to time at rect.news. Have you ever seen Rect?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's just like this list of all the hacks and like two-thirds of them are bridges, right? So like
Hmm.
what is technically different about Rosen that
All
allows you
right. So
to do this?
so we dove into the security assumptions of bridging before we designed it, right? So we kind of had like a first principles approach. If we're going to design a bridge, the first thing we need to really understand is why do bridges fail, right? And then take that knowledge and try to implement a solution that avoids the pitfalls that we've seen in the space. And a large part of kind of this failure process In my opinion, it's what I would call nonlinear scaling assumptions, where it's like every time you add an endpoint, right? You move into a new environment. You get new logic if you're going the smart contract way, which means you have new dependencies. And so it's like your attack vector is growing faster than just one to one, right? And that's incredibly hard to manage in moving environments, which blockchains are, living, moving environments. They go through updates. Every once in a while we'll have new standards, new logic. And so it becomes something that's very hard to defend, right?
Yeah, so maybe in simple terms, if one blockchain upgrades, the other one
hmm
doesn't, your
hmm
system now has to be reconfigured,
Yeah,
like kind of.
we have to update and keep things in sync in real time. And that's just on the chain itself. Then you have all of the standards, um, the logic of each particular chain, the dependencies that, you need to program the logic. So, you kind of have this chain of risk whenever you get into uh like smart contracts, right? Where it's not just the contract itself, it's also like the dependencies that you're using to interact with the chain could be broken, and then that can be exploited, and then you have like a downhill risk, right? So instead of this mint and burn, which is how most smart contract based blockchains are configured, we have this idea of lock and unlock, right? We use vaults. And actually, you see that in Ergo itself, where one of the complaints that sometimes we run into is we don't have like a smart token standard where you have this ability to just create a contract and mint and burn from it. And a part of the reason why is you have like infinite mint risk, right? If somebody can exploit that, they can essentially mint infinite tokens. And so, the first thing that we do when we set up these vaults is we will mint a large supply of coins or tokens. We'll put them in a cold wallet. And then from that point, it's constantly audited, right? And we rely on this idea of kind of a dual layer multi-sig would be the simplest like way to describe it, where how Rosen functions as a protocol is first you have this reporting layer, and their job is to scan. They're auditors, right?
Those are the
And
watchers.
the watchers, yeah, they're auditors essentially. So they are constantly watching, an endpoint. If something happens, they report it to a smart contract on Ergo that creates the first layer of consensus, right? And the nice thing about that is we get this idea of pre-truth, right? It's like prior to execution, what is supposed to happen, which is kind of a failure point for a lot of bridges because they learn something is wrong after it happens. Right. So having this idea of saying, okay, well, this is what should happen, and then we execute what should happen. In my opinion, it's like initially I was thinking clearance and settlement in the banking system, where there are two distinct processes where you go, you receive something, you have to go through an auditing process, clear the transaction, and then, it moves to another stage where it kind of executes settlement and funds are moved. Right. It works. So you don't really need to like reintroduce like new things. It's just modernize it. And being that it's decentralized, then we get into this idea of um, decentralized incentives, which is profit distribution, right? That's one of the most powerful things we see with blockchain is this ability to distribute profit. So Rosen leverages that to try to create like community and people that are incentivized and earn from bridge transactions. So in a way, it's kind of like you're mining interchain, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, it does. It does. I I think I really appreciate the approach where it's like, okay, we recognize the limitations that we're dealing with in terms
hmm
of people's intentions, and also just like, oh, like why can't this just be automated entirely? It's like,
hmm
so we've come up with a solution that aligns people's incentives. So as you said, it's like a community of watchers. I mean, there's hundreds of watchers.
Yeah. At
Yeah,
this point, there's a couple hundred. You
Yeah,
know,
100.
it's something like we could have built a system that didn't include profit distribution, right? But then it's like, okay, you no longer have a check on the system, and you no longer have an incentive for participation, right? And I really hope, I know Rosen is kind of new and we're still, working into new environments and we're still in the process of figuring out like the politics on top of chain of, how to get added into different applications, infrastructure, etc. But my hope is that longer term, we now have this layer of people that are incentivized and profit from growth,
Yeah.
right? And that becomes powerful because then you have like a community that can push the adoption of Rosen itself versus just a team building stuff.
Yeah, and it's also like a functional machine that grows over time, not
Hmm.
not like a burn, as you were mentioning, having to pay people to access their thing. It's not, you're not just like subtracting funds out of the treasury until it hits zero. It's an
Yeah.
actual working machine that powers itself, through this profit incentive. Super cool.
And a lot of the times when you see, market listing, it comes with this friction cost up front, and there's a certain incentive that the team's going to recoup that, right? And that creates a weird alignment of incentives itself because, now you have a team potentially trading against their own ecosystem to recoup the cost of working with a third party.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately quite common, it seems, with listings because, in many cases, when you're talking larger exchanges, you can get into the millions, right?
Yeah.
So, there was a article as an example of somebody, listing on a Korean exchange and paying $10 million. That's more than the entire history of development funds, exchanges, like everything we've done on Ergo just to work with the third party, which is insane. Like the incentives don't line up.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Is there anything else about like the implementation of Rosen that you wanted to talk about before like the next topic?
sure, I think that we made a couple of choices that are probably, I don't know, non-standard in the space. An example would be we call, like erg that's wrapped rs-erg. And it's because we want to let people know that there is additional security complexity, right? A lot of the times security complexities in crypto is very buried to where it's like obfuscated until we find out there's a problem and then post-mortem we figure out what the problem was, and that's kind of a terrible design. So my hope with like the overall design and having everything open source, public facing, anybody can join if they're willing to stomach some economic friction to make sure that the bridge doesn't get spammed. It gives less that's hidden from end users, and I think that that's a big part of the strength of Rosen itself.
Just not ending up on wrecked.news. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the goal. Like that would I would be wrecked if that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think I agree with all of that, man. And I think you've explained it pretty simply.
Mhm.
Maybe one more kind of open-ended question, like just a kind of like long term, what's your vision for
Sure.
Rosen?
Well, I think that we have a couple of verticals that we can really build on, right? So in the blockchain space, we have this idea of layer twos, okay? And essentially what a layer two is it's the idea of pre-confirmation with the assumption things are going to settle later, right? And so like one thing we will run into periodically is Rosen is slow. It's slow by design, right? But you want additional checks on your funds. So, when you get faster transactions between systems that, like finality and proof of work is based on how many blocks have been added, right? So if the sooner it's final, the less secure it is. The same is potentially true in proof of stake, where you have like the historical rollback, where You can say, okay, on this chain, the longest rollback has been 60 blocks. So if we shoot lower than 60 blocks, we're assuming that that's never going to happen again, and it could, right?
Yeah.
So you're inheriting a lot of security complexities in different environments that are, not always straightforward to understand. And so we
Yeah.
said, okay, let's build this slow, let's make it secure, and most users do want speed, right? And it's something we have the capacity to do. Essentially, what that would, again, let's just take from what exists that works. In the banking world, if you want a faster transfer, you pay a premium, right? And so we potentially can build a system around Rosen, not within it, but around it, which is an important distinction to make, where you have liquidity providers on either endpoint. Somebody sends and they say, hey, I want to pay extra to have this settle faster. The liquidity provider will basically assume the risk of faster settlement for a premium, and then the bridge transaction will pay them on a delay, right? And so users get their funds, faster. The liquidity provider gets a premium markup, and the core assumption itself doesn't change, right? And in building around Rosen, that's something that we need to be very like mindful to protect, because as soon as you start to introduce leverage into bridges, it is a you get economic security complexity, which is its own, like crazy vertical. We saw that with like Thorchain as an example, where they said, "Hey, we're going to have this,
Mhm.
where we're going to create DeFi inside of the bridge," and that's a terrible idea.
Yeah,
It's profitable.
the whole thing was like a short on Bitcoin, and like, oh, it went up, so everything fell apart.
Yeah, it's potentially really, really profitable, but it introduces just assumptions that are breaking. Like in my base rule in bridge design is, okay, we want to not rehypothecate assets. Just that simple. We want to keep everything one to one in a way that's transparent, auditable. Any user can, check that. And it's strange because we even see like custodial solutions on Coinbase, right? And the auditability there is a little foggy. Like somehow we've created a better custodial solution than most of the exchanges that are working with, you know, Fortune 500 companies, which is kind of insane to think about, but that's, I don't know, state of the space.
Yeah, yeah, man. Okay, so long term, you're imagining Rosen connecting, um, I mean, all the major layer ones. Is that the
Well,
goal?
if you look at like product differentiation, there are a ton of bridges that work with ETH because you have like parallel logic via the EVM, right? And so I think that if you're going to like compete, you need some sort of competitive advantage. And one thing that Rosen, like the natural advantage of Rosen itself is that it was designed to work across non-compatible environments, right? So I look across at other projects that you know are similar to Ergo in terms of they don't have this. I'm going to call it an insider advantage in terms of working with a lot of partners in the space, but they're technically rich, right? You can look at proof of work projects, Nervos, Alf, Caspa, like they're real projects. There's a lot of research, a ton of engineering, that's just disrespected. That's not what the space respects at this point. And so I'm saying, okay, well, if I look across at, different projects and I see that they have these same friction points, in terms of market access, building into them creates a richer, ecosystem with a lot more technical depth, versus,
Yeah,
you look
yeah,
at Binance and, it's a combination of food and animal items that they're listing today. It's like, well, where is like the technical depth and engineering and like development mind share there? There's none. There really is none. And it kind of creates its own like idiocracy in crypto. So I do think
yeah.
that
Wow. So
using
so so Rosen is like you're looking at the problem that you experienced as an individual, recognize
Hmm.
that everyone who's not operating under these perverse incentives also
Hmm.
experiences that, and so you're trying to really be a boon for the blockchain industry and for the principles that you really agree with, and saying like you don't
Yeah.
have to jump through all these hoops to take part in this revolution that's happening right now. That's really cool.
Yeah, like long term, if we have the ability to backdoor wherever liquidity is concentrated, we're no longer beholden to that aspect of the industry. And I don't like to deal with them. Like I've had years of meetings with teams where it's like I don't know, they're focused on flashy metrics
Are they
that usually,
steepling? Are they like they look like Mr.
well,
Burns, like trying to take your money?
yeah, kind of. They're focused on flashy metrics that don't necessarily translate into anything valuable other than like this ability to pseudo-anonymously extract value. That's what I would say. So,
Yeah,
you know, it's hard to have a technical conversation, versus I don't know. There's a value misalignment in crypto, in my opinion. This is structural, where it's like if you look at how traditional finance operates in like the VC world, they'll have like a 5 to 10 year window where it's like, okay, you're going to build this, and then we're going to slowly push for the adoption of whatever you're building, and that like adoption curve is not instantaneous, right? And so a lot of VCs in crypto, because crypto has this amazing ability to create liquidity right out of the gate, they're looking at like the liquidity risk curve and not the adoption curve. So
mhm,
their focus is backwards. And so then you have like a lot of things that are introduced to market that have a lot of marketing hype, and they're very liquidity curve driven, but they're not adoption focused. And
Axie Infinity was like the biggest thing. It's like, oh, like cool. Didn't really do
Mhm.
anything, made some people a ton of money,
Yeah.
doesn't
It doesn't
exist.
translate to
Yeah,
adoption.
yeah,
And if you're focused on like the development side and you're looking at the adoption curve, you have to realize, okay, where is Rosen going to be in 5 years? That's kind of the goal. Where can Rosen be in 10 years? That's the goal. It's not
yeah,
like where is Rosen going to be on the 5 minute chart against Bitcoin? You can't think
yeah.
like that. Never
And
build anything
and
valuable.
your whole approach has been like, how do we build to withstand that 100-year flood?
Hmm.
Not like what happened this past year, and then think you're
Yeah,
good.
because
I love it.
the crypto space is increasingly fragile, in my opinion, where, as things become more mainstream and more subject to the whims and like choices of like the political environment, things are going to potentially be more fragile, right? And
Yeah,
so our goal as like an industry, at least when I started, was how do we create non-fragile systems, to
yeah.
where
Something that's not going to fall apart when the other team gets elected or whatever.
exactly. Exactly. Like we need to be able to withstand ideally state level attacks, right? That's kind of the idea Bitcoin was founded on. And so we've tried to follow design principles that will support that in really harsh environments. Like that was the goal of Rosen, is how do we make like unstoppable access? That way, if KuCoin gets their access to work with Americans pulled, and exchanges say, hey, you have this mixer on your chain that we don't agree with, so we're going to delist you. Like how can we navigate those type of attacks without kind of losing our tether to larger markets? Um, so Rosen is kind of a ongoing attempt to harden, or make her go hard to kill, basically.
Yeah, I love it, man. That's good. Um, okay, so I just wanted to jump into the Rosen site real quick and
Sure.
just kind of show people what this is, and maybe how to use it. So, uh, can you see that all right?
Hmm.
All right, so this is the list of locked assets. So just to give people an idea, there are like over 40 different tokens that can be sent, and a couple coins. Um,
Hmm.
and these are across Ergo, Cardano, and Ethereum right now. Is that correct?
Hmm.
And Binance
Might
is
not.
just now. Yep, Binance
Yep.
just now started. Um, what else is like coming down the pike?
So I think one of the most exciting things that we have been working towards um, is been wallet integrations, right? So right now we have this application that the user needs to go to find, and it kind of creates additional friction and complexity in terms of like the bridging process. I've been like I don't know, on the Nautilus wallet team since that came out, and MHS, who's my co-founder, has his own wallet actually, Minotaur, that he was working on in parallel. And so our goal, long term, was to say, okay, let's get the Ergo ecosystem, wallet game kind of leveled up, and then we need to create an SDK to allow wallets to actually integrate Rosen into the interface, which hopefully will make the bridging process itself a lot simpler because it's happening from a single UI rather than bouncing across kind of the website and the web extension or the node wallet or wherever you're coming in from. So I do think like in terms of the front facing aspect of Rosen, that's going to be a big development in 2025. Part of the reason why, we were, I don't know, maybe a little bit slow out of the gate with that is when you create an open SDK, I don't know, you kind of create this parallel incentive to where there's an opportunity for somebody to integrate a thing that looks like Rosen Wallet that's not,
Hmm.
right? That's like
Hmm.
the downside to open source code sometimes is it's like, okay, you've just given this recipe that somebody can tweak with and say, okay, well, now you're using Rosen Bridge, but actually you're bridging to my wallet,
Yeah, so
right?
you got to have enough there to like make it super obvious that,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then difficult to
we
mimic.
need awareness in that because that does happen sometimes where you have like fraudulent front ends and that type of nonsense in the crypto
Mhm.
space. But I think we finally like matured enough, at least on the wallet side, where we have a pretty good foundation to start plugging that into, and then we can start working with external partners, right? We can say, okay,
Yeah.
some of the Cardano wallets that could potentially support Rosen, in the interface, and long term, my hope is that we can take a lot of these assets, let's say Ergo as an example, that is traditionally seen some friction in terms of how to access Ergo, how to buy it, and put it in consumer-facing wallets that are very, they that have adoption. When
Yeah.
Ergo can, when Ergo or RS Erg can be bought in Coinbase Wallet and Phantom Wallet, and that it's like, okay, suddenly we can not only leverage the liquidity of other environments, but we also have like this ability to use all the tooling built around them, which is exciting.
Yeah, man. And just to like to that point, I was looking at this chart and I see is that 3 million erg? 3 million erg
Yeah.
are
Yeah,
currently on the
so
bridge.
one of my like personal goals when we were designing Rosen is it was like, okay, at some point I'm hoping that the liquidity in Rosen is equal or greater to the amount that's held on exchanges, right? Because I know the cost of those listings.
Hmm.
Right. So I can't just say, hey, this is how much it was openly. I'm sure people can audit it because everything the Ergo Foundation did was transparent. But it's like that gives me a real like numerical value in terms of the market that I've created and how much it would
Hmm.
cost in parallel to work with a third party. And so right now, Rosen is one of the largest exchanges in
Yeah.
simple terms. So that kind of uh, makes me look back and say, okay, well, the cost savings was definitely worth it, and that's a market that no longer is beholden to regulations or a company's internal like risk assumptions because at any point any one of these exchanges could in theory pull an FTX and blow up, and not only do we have the regulatory risk but you have their own like internal risk in terms of how they manage assets and leverage and hacks and all this
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, and now you have this system that includes hundreds of people and is open to including more people if they wish.
Yeah.
that is securing this portion of the supply. That's really amazing. Good work, man.
Thank you.
Um, I thought this page was really interesting as well. You can just like a live view of like everything that's going on, and you can see kind of what's getting sent from where to where. You can check yours, you send yours. It's like, oh, it's been like 30 minutes. What happened?
Hmm.
And you can see, you can see like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. Just be patient. And the whole thing is just really easy to use. So when I look at this, it's really just picking, where am I coming from? Where am I going? And then you plug your address in, and then you
Hmm.
select the token that you're sending and the amount. Then you get a depiction of your fees and the cost to transfer. I know some people kind of they didn't like the time. They wanted it to be
Hmm.
faster, and then they also wanted it to be cheaper, of course.
Hmm.
But really, this was really intentional, and I think I understand why things are the way they are. And it's like you're paying for you get what you pay for, and
Yeah.
so
Well,
we
even if you were to like spin up a Phantom wallet right now and build bridge from say like Solana to Ethereum, right? In that inner wallet bridge, it's actually the exact same cost. And the difference is instead of being distributed to like a open group of watchers, that just goes to one party. So like
yeah
on a fee footing, we're actually pretty much in alignment with where the industry is, in terms of like bridging. The difference is where the payment goes.
yeah yeah that's really good, man. That's really good. I get it. I think what you're doing is important, and I
Hmm.
hope that people from the other ecosystems can, watch this video, see other content, and kind of recognize that it's not just like us fighting them for like
Hmm.
the 400th rank in market cap total or
Yeah.
whatever. Like no, man, we're trying to make build some value and really like change what the whole top 100, top 50 projects looks like. Um,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
there's one little hidden bonus in Rosen that I really like. That's just kind of a function of using the Ergo blockchain and that's like when we create the initial like threshold-based report on Ergo, um, we create a transaction, right? That pays miners downstream. But we also create a box that lives on Ergo for about 4 years, and it does have some erg in it. And then 4 years later, it's cleaned up and it pays miners again. So every Rosen transaction technically will pay Ergo miners twice.
wow, yeah, that's cool. Demarize strikes again.
Yeah,
I
so
like
long
it.
term, it's like if we can connect to enough ecosystems and get enough transactions through, we're actually paying miners twice for every transaction. Plus, we're paying this, uh, you know, set of watchers on top of Ergo. And ultimately, I do think that profit distribution is the greatest power of blockchain, right?
Mhm.
That's its superpower. And unfortunately, I think more and more we're seeing profit extraction being used as the superpower of blockchain, which is backwards.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so is there anything, any place we should send people who want to learn more about Rosen? Maybe how do you participate as a watcher, or how do you connect your chain? Those types of
Sure.
things.
Sure. I would say like in terms of like the general public, if they want to learn about it, I think one of the best places would be the Discord or Telegram for Rosen Bridge. And part of the reason why is because we have all of these infrastructure providers that are constantly checking in, updating, and actively providing system services to Rosen, right? And so you have like a depth of knowledge that is me plus 200. And I would say collectively the 200 are, better than me actually at troubleshooting and figuring out exactly what's going on with, different, I don't know, problems, tweaks, aspects of the system because they're, like actively incentivized to participate. We do have Twitter where we try to keep like the news feed rolling. We have Discord, so it's something to, kind of dig into. In terms of like if a ecosystem wants to join one of the things I've kind of done in parallel, and again, it's just based on like our own history. At some point, we were looking at bridges, right? And so you had a variety of, let's say, documentation, sometimes, coming from a external system that's unique into something that's standardized is not really very straightforward. And so we started, uh, really trying to cook documentation and onboarding stuff with uh, Chain, which is, in the kind of integration stages of development. We'll probably see that live. I don't know. I say 2 weeks just because we always need end-to-end tests and everything. But um, I'm hoping that that comes with sufficient documentation to where, especially anything that's a Bitcoin fork, it should be relatively straightforward to follow and say, okay, that's potentially just adds a lot of value. You have Bitcoin
Yeah.
Cash, Litecoin.
Yeah.
Uh, I think Flux is a fork of Bitcoin, Namecoin. A lot of different stuff out there that use kind of the Bitcoin um, model and extended it in some way. And the same is true with the EVM, right?
Hmm.
Having Ethereum integrated really opens us up to the potential to move across like EVM compatible environments, which I think will happen naturally, but again, one of the greatest benefits of Ergo itself and Rosen is non-compatible environments. So how do we work with these systems that are really unique? One of my personal goals, just for I don't know, funsies, let's call it, is going to be to create, thresholds on top of Monero and, relist Monero on different exchange environments. Because that is ultimately going to be a great test of, okay, we tried to
Yep.
build the system to be resilient. So, like, let's break a rule and see what happens, right?
Yep.
You got to stress test it at some point, and I think that's a great way to do it. And also potentially say, hey, like this is why we built the system because, Monero is famous for crossing the line and getting, delisted from markets, which has been kind of painful for them, but their community has adapted really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on. Hey, well, I think this was a lot of really good information, Joe. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me and explain all this stuff. And
Sure.
also just like thanks for being a good representative of a lot of the same values that I try to put out into the world and for good doing just good work all around. So good on you, man.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Have a good day, sir.
You too.